101, where we discuss practical questions to help equip you to share your faith more effectively. And here today to help me talk about one of my favorite topics, human origins, is Dr. Fazale Rana. Welcome, Fuz.
Krista, thanks for having me.
Maybe we should start by laying a little bit of a foundation here of what the Bible talks about in terms of human uniqueness. How are humans different than animals? Maybe you can give us a little overview of that.
Yeah, well, one of the things that scripture teaches when it comes to human origins and human nature is that human beings are unique compared to all other of God's creatures. And what makes us unique is a quality that the Bible describes as the image of God. Now, scripture doesn't do the best job in the world of actually defining what the image of God is, but we can get some clues by looking carefully at some of the biblical texts. So, for example, in Genesis 2, it tells us that Adam was made from the dust of the earth. Well, so are, according to Genesis 2:19, the birds in the air and the beasts in the field. And so what I take from that is that what makes us unique isn't our physical makeup or our biological makeup, but rather something different, something immaterial. So Genesis 2:7 talks about Adam receiving the divine breath and the animals don't. And so from that, I think we can glean the idea that the image of God is something that is immaterial, something that is spiritual in nature. And of course, the image of God is a very important concept because we bear God's image as human beings, we're able to enter into a relationship with the Godhead mediated through the work of Christ on the cross. And of course, the image of God is the foundation of Christian ethics because every human being bears God's image. Every human being has infinite worth and value.
That's really helpful. And I think that when we talk about the image of God, I like how you're drawing our attention to the uniqueness of humanity. And that's not to denigrate the animals or any other parts of God's creation, but just to recognize, in the words of Psalm 8, that God has made us to be a little lower than the angels, that we have been created to rule and to reign. Now, I know that one of your ideas, and others have this idea too, that the image of God, one of the ways it's expressed is through artistic expression, symbolic thought. Maybe we can get into that a little bit and what you see as being a connection between the image of God and those ideas.
Yeah, and as we've already mentioned, scripture doesn't really define very clearly what the image of God is. And so over the centuries, theologians have produced models for essentially defining and describing the image of God. And one of those models we might call the resemblance view, at least this is the terminology used by the Old Testament scholar Jack Collins. And the idea here is that human beings bear God's image, and the image of God are certain qualities and certain capacities that we have as human beings. And one of those capacities is our ability to communicate through language and our ability to engage in rational thought and abstract thinking. And these capacities all flow out of an ability to represent the world with symbols and then to manipulate those symbols in a near infinite number of ways to create alternative scenarios. And so symbolism, you might argue, is a manifestation of the image of God. And you could think of symbolism as reflected in our ability to engage in language, but also our ability to engage in musical expression and artistic expression. And so language and music and art, I believe, are really qualities that flow out of the fact that we are image bearers. Clearly, no other creature alive today has these three capacities.
So then I'm imagining what we would expect to see is in the fossil record, as we see human beings coming into existence in a very unique way. In the fossil record, we should see concomitant with that also artistic expression, symbolic thought, and that kind of a thing. So I'm wondering, what does the paleontological record tell us?
Yeah, and Krista, your point is really a very important point because from an evolutionary perspective, the view is that human beings really differ only in degree, not kind, from other creatures. And so therefore the expectation would be that hominins like Neanderthals, for example, may have very well possessed the capacity for symbolism as well. And so by looking at the fossil record and the archaeological record, we can really determine whether or not human beings uniquely bear God's image, or whether or not other creatures also bear God's image. And this really is a test to distinguish between a creation model and an evolutionary model. And language is not something that will preserve in the archaeological record, but artistic expression is. And so, what we actually see in the archaeological record is that when human beings appear on the scene, we see an explosion of artistic ability that shows up, artistic artifacts that appear that seem to be uniquely correlated with human beings. And so, in a broad sense, the archaeological record really does affirm the biblical account of human origins and is, I think, incompatible with an evolutionary view of human origins.
So I'm imagining what we see in that record is some kind of example of maybe cave paintings. I've seen those on some documentaries. Is that the kind of artistic artifacts that we're talking about here?
Yes, exactly. We see, cave art, but we also see figurative art as well, statuettes and things like that. But what's interesting is that the oldest cave art that we have discovered actually now is found in Asia, and the oldest dated cave art is from the island of Sulawesi, which is part of Indonesia, and there are cave paintings there that are older than 45,000 years in age. And this is actually significant because we also see cave art that's about in the 35 to 40,000 year age in Europe, which means that when humans began to migrate around the world, we already had the capacity for artistic expression. And the archaeological record seems to push the appearance of cave art closer and closer to the time when we think human beings first appear in the fossil record.
Well, this is really fascinating. I want to encourage our viewers to go check out your blog, Cells Design. You can find that at our website at reasons.org, and check out some of Fuzz's blog posts related to artistic expression and human origins.